Welcome to DBS Discussions, Safeguarding in Focus, where we'll be joined by experts from across the disclosure and barring service, and in this series, guests from a range of external organisations to explore the issues that matter in safeguarding. With guests from organisations such as the NSPCC, Craft Trust and Unlock, alongside colleagues from DBS, each episode brings you insights, expert perspectives and practical guidance to support safer recruitment and safer practice. Whether you're an employer, a safeguarding lead, or simply want to understand more about how DBS works, you're in the right place. Welcome to the first episode of our second series. I'm Hayley Kay, an independent podcast host, and today we're going to be finding out how DBS checks support safer recruitment. To help us navigate our way through, my guest today is Liza Ware from the NSPCC, where she's a senior consultant. So welcome to the podcast, Liza. I know a lot of our listeners will be familiar with the work of the NSPCC, but can you tell us a bit about your role specifically?
Hi, Hayley. So my name's Liza Ware. I work in the Child Protection and Sport Unit, which is a team in the NSPCC. And we've been around for 25 years this year. We're going to be having a rebrand soon, but our work and our mission within the NSPCC is to support sport organisations to have robust safeguarding arrangements. So that'll include supporting them with policy reviews, training, quality assurance against our standards. We've got a set of 10 standards, and one of them actually is around preparation, which is around safer recruitment. So it all fits in really nicely, and we work across 4 contracts, so Sport England, UK Sport, Sport Northern Ireland and Sport Wales as well.
And are we talking all of them, like grassroots through to like the elite, as it were?
Yeah, absolutely. So because of the contracts that extended across from grassroots, so we'll work with organisations like the Football Association, English Cricket Board, Rugby Union, Rugby League, England Boxing. So we work with a whole range of national governing bodies, and that includes their grassroots side of things, but all the way up to world-class performance as well. So we work with organisations like GB Taekwondo, GB Boxing, snow sports, to make sure that even in that high performance world-class program, so Olympic and Paralympic athletes, that we're supporting them to make sure that there's safeguarding arrangements for the elite, the top world-class athletes as well. So right the way from little tiny young people doing under sixes, right the way through to Olympians and Paralympians.
I guess that's something you just don't think about, when you watch the Olympics, that actually a lot of them are children, are young people, and they'll need safeguarding and they need you to protect them, essentially. I want to ask then about specifically how DBS checks support safer recruitment for some of those organisations that you've mentioned.
Yeah, so if we think about the millions of people that do sport every single day, and if I think about children and young people, so they're at home, they're at school, the next biggest sector is sport and physical activity. And for me, there's hundreds of thousands of volunteers out there, and what we need to be able to do is to look at those individuals who are offering their time to make sure that they're suitable candidates to be in that particular role. So one of the things that DBS Checks does is gives us a practical step, a practical tool in our toolkit to be able to make sure that that individual is a suitable candidate to work with children and young people. So it gives the organisation the opportunity to see if there's any information on somebody's DBS check, so police records, any police intelligence, if somebody's on the barred list, which would mean that somebody was not suitable to work with children and young people. So it just is that effective tool really to make sure that we're able to have the right individual within our organisation to support our children and adults at risk as well. And what we talk about is there being 5 stages to safer recruitment. So we want people to be able to have good preparation. We want them to select the right people. We want them to choose wisely. We want them to check thoroughly. But we also want them to remain vigilant when that individual's in that organisation as well. So it is all about helping us to create a safer culture where we've got the right people in the right posts.
Absolutely crucial. So, as we know, DBS checks are not a pass or a fail. Essentially, just because a person's got a criminal record doesn't automatically make them unemployable, does it? I mean, of course, it's a consideration, but I guess it's all about each individual and assessing the risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And we work with different organisations. So some organisations are second chance sports, and we want to be able to have the right people, as I said, in the right role. So somebody might have done something in the past that they might be worried that might exclude them from being able to be, say, a boxing coach, for example. But what we want to be able to do is to look at the context of that particular offence and look at the context of the role that they're going to be involved in. And we want to be able to look at, has there been a successful rehabilitation of that individual? And we need to apply a consistent risk assessment process to that. So we're not saying that everybody who's got a criminal record can't be involved in youth sport. But we need to be able to make sure, are they the right individuals? So have they been rehabilitated? Have they got the right value base? Have they got the right characteristics to be involved with our young people? And we know the power of sport, that we're able to change children and young people's lives. So if somebody has had an offence in the past, then they might have been able to show that actually I'm a reformed character now. I've changed. I'm somebody that's able to give back to my community and make a difference for children and young people. But we just need to be able to make sure that we've got a robust process in place. That means that we're risk assessing that content and applying that consistently to everybody that applies for that particular role, and that in the organisation then needs to be able to stand on that decision, make a defensible decision around whether they've decided to proceed with somebody's application or decided not to proceed with somebody's application.
So, say an organisation is doing the process with someone they want as a volunteer or to employ them, and information has come back on a DBS check. What should they be doing about that?
So what they need to be doing is having a process, and that starts with having the right policies and procedures. So what we would recommend is that organisations have a safer recruitment policy and procedure, and that will include things like those 5 stages I talked about before, including things like self-disclosure checks. But we also need to be able to make sure that they've got the right people in their organisation to form a case management group with the right skills, the right expertise to be able to look at that information and robustly assess that context of that offences that were happening. They need to be transparent in that process, so let people know, so have it as part of a policy that it is on their website, so people know in advance what the process is, so people can make that decision themselves. So they might have said, well, I've got an offence, it wasn't that long ago, actually I'm not suitable, so they can almost cross themselves out and say, that's not a suitable role for me. But it also means then that the organisation then, by having a case management group, will be able to risk assess that information and gather as much information as possible with that individual's consent, because they've got to be able to consent to say, yes, I'm okay with you going and speaking to the police, to social care, to probation, to show you that I have had a period of rehabilitation. And what we want people to be able to do then is to think about, are you the right person in that organisation to do that risk assessment? Or do we need to get expertise from outside of the organisation to be able to look at that content on a check and be able to say, actually, this person is or not suitable for that particular role?
Can you talk us through risk? Like, what is risk?
So risk would be something around like hazards, potential likelihood of harm happening. It could be about a vulnerability that might result in injury or harm to an individual. And what we need to be thinking about is in the context of safer recruitment or safeguarding children and young people. So we want to be able to make sure that we're looking at the possibility of whether something could happen to a child or young person. So when we're thinking about it from a safer recruitment perspective is there some information in somebody's past, somebody's history that would tell us something that would give us clues about an individual, about their behaviors, about their characteristics, about what values they hold. And then we need to be able to think about, would that create a vulnerability within our organisation that might expose a child or a young person to risk of abuse or harm?
What kind of factors, Lisa, can increase risk?
So it can be multiple factors, really. So we're talking about people. So that is a clear factor which could impact on the likelihood of risk. It could be around, is there something in their history that tells us that somebody might pose a risk? Could be about environmental factors as well. So thinking about whether that's a coaching position, a volunteer coaching position where it's maybe one-to-one coaching. So, quite often we think about sports, we think about team sports like football or rugby, but actually there's lots of sports which are one-to-one. And it might be that somebody's, a coaching in like a racket sport. And that might create a vulnerability if we were in an isolated part of a leisure centre, that one-to-one level of interventions with a young person. It could be that we're going on away trips. Quite often sports competitions happen over weekends and we're going into hotels with children and young people, or they're in dormitory accommodation. It could be that, young people are away from their protected carers for long periods of times. We know that children and young people that do sport can spend quite a lot of time in that sport and environment. So building up those relationships with individuals can also create a vulnerability if there's a high dependency on an individual.
So I'm guessing this is just about like a big picture, looking at all those things and taking all that into account.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we're thinking about a big picture, I always think about, a DBS check is one tool in our tool belt when we're thinking about safer recruitment, and it's only one part of safeguarding. So if we're looking at that big picture, we want to have an organisation which is a safer organisation, where they have a safeguarding culture, where people are not fearful about raising concerns. People are able to check and challenge each other and go, actually, that behaviour there was inappropriate. And we have that conversation, we have that robust conversation, we have that open conversation where we're able to say to people, actually, well, we need to do it this way, and not put our children and young people at risk, which might put the adults at risk of allegations as well. We want to be able to make sure that we've got good policies, procedures, whistleblowing processes in place, that there's clear reporting and recording processes. So if people have got fears or concerns or worries or anxieties, there's a lead safeguarding officer, there's a club welfare officer that people are able to go to. So that's a whole big picture. So that's a whole system environment which creates a safer culture for anybody participating in sport, whether we're talking about juniors or we're talking about adults.
Gosh, there is so much to consider. I mean, going back to the risk, what are the sort of mitigating and the aggravating factors then when you're assessing risk?
Yeah, so I think if we're thinking about something that's a aggravating factor, just on a very, very basic level, that would be around something that makes you more worried, and a mitigating would mean something that would make you less worried. That's just in a basic thing. So for an example, if we're thinking about a mitigating circumstances, so there's an assault that happened, it might have been a slap across the face and it might have been between two children. That might be a mitigating factor. But if we were worried, something that was an aggravating would be an adult punches a child, it's a maybe sustained attack, then that would make us more worried about that individual. So that they're the types of things that we're thinking about when we're thinking about aggravating and mitigating factors. And what we need to be doing in our case management group is actually looking at them and saying what elevated our level of risk, or what might have kind of thought, oh, well, that was maybe that context, that was, they were younger, they were a child themselves, the assault or whatever the offence was maybe a lesser offence, and we take all of those things into consideration.
So, Lisa, for example, say as an organisation, you've decided to allow the candidate or volunteer to proceed, or maybe you've actually at this point said, no, you can't proceed with your application. Has the individual that's applied then got the right to challenge the decision that you've made?
Yeah, most organisations will have an appeals process or a complaints process that people will utilise. And what we always say to organisations, regardless of whether you decide to let somebody proceed with their application or say that they're not suitable, they need to be able to stand up to that decision and defend that decision. And one of the things that we always talk about is it being putting the child at the centre of the decision-making processes. So if we get it right for the child and we're thinking about their welfare, the paramountcy rule of the child's welfare being paramount to that decision-making process, we're going to get it right for other people. The way that we get it right for everybody within the organisation is we're taking all reasonable steps to gather as much information as possible. And by doing that, we're working in partnership with the individual themselves and saying, look, well, can we go and seek information from other organisations like police, children's social care, probation, and we're applying a consistent risk assessment model for everybody. Because sometimes I think people go, well, we know that individual, we've known them for 20 years, like we can just forget about that. No, you can't. You've still got to risk assess that information that you've got on that check to make sure that we're being transparent and we're being consistent for everybody, and that whatever measures we put in place, it's proportionate. And one of the measures might be that the individual is not suitable. It could be that maybe they're suitable in a different role, or it could be they're suitable with some level of supervision and interventions. But the organisation needs to be able to defend that decision either way. And they need to be able to make those decisions not in isolation. So it wouldn't be me making that decision. It would be people within that case management group who've got the skills, knowledge and experience to be able to look at that information and risk assess that information, and then for them to be able to record the rationale for that decision making processes. So a bit like your maths homework is actually put all your workings out. Why did you come to that conclusion on that particular day with that particular amount of information? And as I said, it needs to be as practicable, gathering as much information as possible from multiple sources. But I was also look at what information that individual provided as well on their application forms and on their self-declaration forms as well. That helps us, and the references as well, which helps us to create a rounded picture of what that individual looks like and their suitability to work in that particular environment.
I have to say, I mean, the assessing the risk is absolutely crucial in this, but it's a big job. So I'm hoping there's somewhere that organisations can go for some support, for some help, because no one starts as an expert in this stuff.
Absolutely. And sport is made up of multiple different types of organisations. So you've got the FA with hundreds of thousands of volunteers, and then you've got really small organisations which maybe have about 30, 40, 50 clubs. So there's a very small volunteer pool or workforce within that organisation. And the lead safeguarding officer in that organisation might be wearing multiple hats. So they might be the operations manager, they might be the competitions manager, and also the safeguarding person. And they might not have those skills within their toolkit to be able to risk assess. So what we'd say is look at yourself first. Have you got the skills and expertise? If not, is there somebody in your case management group that might have those skills? Or do you need to bring in specialist help? There's loads of information as well on our website as well. So people can be able to go on there. We've got safer recruitment pages, and one of the things that we signpost people to is we've got a guidance that we did in partnership with NACRO, which is called Making Safe and Fair Membership Decisions, and it's got a really good risk assessment tool in the back of it.
Oh, I love that. Just what's NACRO, by the way?
I knew you were going to ask me that. So it's National Association for the Care and Resettlement of Offenders. So it is a charity that works with individuals who have got criminal convictions and supports them to make sure that people are able to make fair decisions on their behalf and they're not excluded from society. So we did this quite a while ago with them, and we have updated it, and it's a really good tool for people to, it's a really robust document that people can be able to go to and refer back to. We've also got loads of information, as said, on our website, but our colleagues as well in NSPCC Learning have got a online safer recruitment module, so a click-through online learning opportunity, which is £35, which I think is quite accessible for people to be able to go on. It is, I think, more aimed at schools, but I think the principles will apply to other sectors, and sport being one of those as well. And we also provide training to the organisations that I talked about earlier on that we're funded to work with. We've got risk assessment training within safer recruitment process as well, for those organisations. But if organisations who maybe not funded want to be able to access that, then we do have a commercial team that would be able to maybe look at providing that for a paid consultancy fee.
Well, we'll make sure we put all those in the episode notes as well. So it'll save people looking. We can put them all in there. Now, as we've already touched on, DBS checks are just part of the safer recruitment process. So what else should organisations be considering in addition to the DBS check?
Yeah, so this is a really good point. And I think, as I said before, it's, DBS checks is one tool in our belt, and it's one part of safer recruitment, but it's one part of safeguarding responsibilities. And I always go back to, we should always think about what's happened in the past and thinking about how we can make better decisions, because that's what we should always be striving for, doing things better. And if we go back to 2004 in the Bichards inquiry, and I'll just read it out because I think for me it always sticks with me, and I always talk about this on our safeguard and safer recruitment training that we talk about, the Bichards inquiry. So it says, for those agencies whose job it is to protect children and vulnerable people, the harsh reality that if a sufficiently devious person is determined to seek out opportunities to work their evil, no one can guarantee they can be stopped. And it's our task to make it as difficult for them to succeed. And that's the thing, isn't it? We need to make it as difficult as possible for people who have got a propensity to harm children or people, adults at risk, for them to access our organisations that we're working in. So we've got to put in all our measures, really, and that comes back to those 5 stages again around preparation, selecting the right people, choosing wisely, checking thoroughly, and remaining vigilant. And if we're thinking about safer recruitment, that's in the preparation stage and the checking thoroughly, that we really need to be able to make sure that we've got the right individuals in our organisation.
Yeah, so essentially, these people are wolves in sheep's clothing, and it's they don't wear signs, do they? It's your job, like you say, to make it as difficult as possible for them to get a foot in the door. So say you're an organisation and you're going to be recruiting soon, whether that's for volunteers to come and help out or actually employing someone in a paid role. Going all the way back to the beginning, before you even put the advert out, what should you be considering at that point?
Yeah, I'm glad that you've talked about that, Hayley, before you even put the advert out.
Yeah.
We really need to be planning properly. So one, have you got a policy and procedure in place so you know what you're following, you've got
Yeah.
that consistent approach. Thinking about things like, your job description and your person specification. So I think sometimes we always think about people who sexually offend, and actually there's lots of other offences, which means people are unsuitable to work with children and young people. So if they've got the right value base, does their values align with your organisation? And that should be part of your person specification. Making sure that you've got templates to support your clubs or people within your organisation. So things like self-declaration forms, you can find them on our website. Job descriptions, we've got a variety of different job descriptions on our website as well. And the voice of children as well. So asking the children and young people who are in your club or your environment to say, what type of person do you want to come and work with you and support you, so that we've got their wishes and feelings as well. So we really need to be able to put all that information out there and make sure that we've got a safeguarding statement as part of our recruitment process, again, to deter people or for people to go, actually, I won't meet that criteria because there is an offence and I won't be suitable. So they're already saying that they're not putting themselves forward because they know that they won't be suitable in the first place. So there's all of those things that kind of help come together to be part of that preparation stage before we're even advertising.
So say that the role's gone out, how do you then move on in terms of selecting the candidates?
So you should have, again, not making decisions in isolation, a panel. So it could be a couple of people within your club or your organisation that would look at that shortlist, and you'd have a criteria that you would match up against. So you already know the type of individual that you're looking for, and look at that application form, see if they meet that shortlisting criteria, having, a actual interview, because I think sometimes people think, oh gosh, they're a volunteer. Why are we making them jump through all of these hoops to become a volunteer? Because we need volunteers. But actually, what we want to be able to do is prevent harm from happening further on down the line. So we've got the right person in the first place, then hopefully that will reduce our safeguarding concerns. So doing things like interviews, maybe, if somebody's going for a coaching role, get them to coach the kids, and then you can get the voice of the child and get the kids' feedback in terms of, how were they with you? Did they communicate effectively with you? Did they engage? Did you get what did you feel about that individual? And then you're able to, as an adult, see actually all of those qualities that they've maybe talked about in their application form. So I think it's not just about kind of having a sit down interview, but maybe a practical side of things where you're actually able to see what they're like with children and young people.
So you're in the process of checking a potential employee or a potential volunteer. Is there anything else that at this point that organisations should be considering?
Yeah, so one of the things that people need to be doing is making sure that we're doing proper, good ID checks. And I think quite often people are thinking about things like from an immigration perspective, but within the safeguarding context, it's really an essential part of safer recruitment. So if I talk about, on my training, I talk quite a lot about, there's a guy called Ian Nixon who applied for a job as a caretaker in Cambridge. And that individual, we all know him as Ian Huntley. And most people didn't realise that actually he applied for the job under his mum's maiden name. And actually, if the proper ID checks were conducted for that individual, then he might not have got in that position as a caretaker in a school. So we really need to be able to see the part that we all play. So I quite often talk about national governing bodies, but it would be somebody downstream, it would be somebody in the club that would be doing those identification checks. And they really need to be able to make sure that they're doing them properly, because that's one part of that process to make sure that we've got the right person.
So I guess it's all about all of these processes and them all working together. But essentially, you've hired that person, they're now in role, but safer recruitment practices sort of don't end, do they, when they're in role. So at this point, they're through the door, they've got through the recruitment process. Like, now what? What are organizations considering at this point?
Yeah, so that's that remaining vigilant section that I talked about, section 5, on the 5 stages. And there's lots of things that people can be doing as part of that process, because what we want to do is we want to create a safer culture for our sports environment. And it's about the whole time that somebody's in that post. So safer recruitment doesn't finish the day that they're in post. It's always, we're always in a process of safer recruitment. And one of the first stages of that is about making sure that we've got a really robust and thorough induction process, because we need to, as individuals volunteering in that organisation, need to know what their safeguarding policy looks like. What is the commitment of that organisation? What's their values when it comes to safeguarding? Do you know what's in your codes of conduct? Because they're a really key part of any organisation's expected professional behaviour. So whether we're talking about a volunteer or a paid member of staff, they're a really key document that helps people to know what is expected of them. So that's one part, is the induction process. The next bit about that regular monitoring. So if there is any concerns, any nagging doubts that comes up about an individual, that we've got a culture where people feel psychologically safe to be able to raise concerns. We're able to do those neutral reporting as well. So just kind of raising, actually, I got this bit of the policy wrong, and then we're having a conversation maybe with our designated safeguarding lead or our club welfare officer. And that kind of shows that actually people are thinking about it. So if actually I do something that is operated outside the policy and go, oh gosh, I've just done something wrong. I'm having a conversation. I'm checking and challenging myself, and I'm learning all the time. That's the type of individual you want in your organisation. But if you've got somebody who's constantly operating outside of what the policies, the procedures, the code of conduct says, then we need to monitor that and think about, is there something sinister going on here? Or is it actually somebody's just not bothered to read the policies and the procedures, or maybe we haven't enabled them to know and understand what's in those procedures. So that's part of that whole process. So it's big.
It is. And something important that I wanted to talk to you about is whistleblowing policies, because essentially, these are absolutely crucial. And I guess one of the things I wanted to touch on is, say you've recruited this person and they've been great. What if they see something that they're not happy with, or that, do you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like that's a really important bit of the puzzle that needs slotting into place, because, what if they do see something that they think's inappropriate or they're not comfortable with? What are the sort of processes there?
Yeah, so for us, quite often when we use the words whistleblowing and disclosures and stuff, those types of language, it elevates it. So people think that it has to be something really serious, like you've seen an assault happen. But what we talk about is people remaining vigilant around poor practice, lower level concerns, indicators of risk. So that comes back to those codes of conduct, and if people are operating outside of them. And we want to be able to have a culture where people are able to raise concerns no matter how small they are as well, because let's catch things earlier, so nip them in the bud early rather than waiting for things to get into a really serious safeguarding concern. And all organisations should have some clear reporting processes and make it as easy as possible. So I'm seeing some really great practices out there where organisations have got apps where children, young people, staff are able to just pick up their phone, quickly do a QR code and do a reporting in process, a reporting message into the organisation, where they're able to look at that and maybe look at to see if there's a pattern of behaviour that would mean somebody was unsuitable. So quite often when we're thinking about whistleblowing, is that serious, top heavy, concerns that happen. Usually people think about sexual abuse when we're talking about that, but we could have things that are just maybe grooming type of behavior, which could be those risk indicators that we could prevent harm from happening if we're addressing these smaller things. But it could also be an indication of people need to be retrained in terms of coaching practices, because maybe they're using out-of-date coaching practices that might be causing physical harm because they're doing it in a way that actually now we know with sports science that that's not appropriate. So it could be from a sport and physiological perspective as well.
I wanted to bring it back then to the DBS, because I'm right in thinking, Anna, that actually there is a legal duty to refer back to DBS if there are safeguarding concerns. Can you talk us through that in a bit more detail?
Yeah, so all organisations in England, Wales and Northern Ireland have got a duty to report concerns to DBS. If somebody is being removed, they've been dismissed, they've been maybe demoted from that position where they were in regulated activity, they were working in teaching, instructing, supervising or caring for children. They maybe decided to retire or leave the organisation, and they did that because there was a concern, a safeguarding concern, or there was a concern about their suitability to work with children and young people. So again, coming back to breaches of codes of conduct. And one of the things is DBS are not an investigating body. So they rely on organisations to be able to feed information into them to make a decision about whether somebody goes on the barred list. So one of the things for us is about making sure that organisations are very much aware of that legal duty and what that involves. So if somebody's been removed for whatever reason and they've caused harm or you've removed them because they're no longer suitable to work with children. Give all of the go through your whole case management processes, and on the balance of probability that you think the likelihood is that they've harmed a child or they were seeking to harm a child, give all of that information to DBS so that they can make a decision about whether somebody goes on the barred list or not. And that's again another tool that we can use to be able to make that suitability decision. So it's not just about the criminal records bit, it's about the barred list as well. And we need organisations to feed that into DBS so they can make those risk assessments themselves to make that decision about that barred list. And it might be that an organisation might have one part that might be that last missing jigsaw puzzle, because it might have been several other organisations that also have put in referrals to DBS, and that might be that final piece of the puzzle that makes that gets that decision over the line.
Yeah, so getting that referral is crucial. So
yeah,
wow, Liza, we have covered so much today. I feel like I've learned loads from our conversation. We have covered loads, but if, to wrap things up, if there's one piece of today's conversation, I know we've talked about a lot, what would you want listeners to take away as sort of what's your takeaway then?
I think for us, we need to be making sure that we're thinking about what's in the best interest of children and being child-centred. That's the bit where we need to start. So the decision around safe recruitment's not about that individual offering to volunteer or putting themselves forward for a paid position. It's about being child-centred. We want to get it right for children and young people. And I'm going to do two. And the other bit is, don't miss any of the steps. They're so important. We've got to be able, if we get one part of those 5 steps wrong, then it could create a vulnerability in there. So don't miss out the steps. So do the preparation, select the right people, choose wisely, check thoroughly, and remain vigilant. So they were my 2 things: being child-centred and do your 5 steps.
Love it. I can just hear how passionate you are. I have really, really enjoyed our chat. Thank you for listening, and we really hope you've enjoyed our discussion. Thank you again to my guest, Liza Ware, Senior Consultant with NSPCC. In our next episode, we'll be looking at the levels of DBS checks and safeguarding. It's a 2-parter, and in part 1, we'll be discussing working with children. I hope you found this episode useful and maybe even picked up some new information. Don't forget, there's a link to all the resources mentioned in the episode notes, and if you'd like a question answering around DBS or any part of the process, you'll find our email there too. Thanks for listening.